A struggling dad picked up his tools to help a farmer. He never expected she'd hold the key to a new beginning. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The sound of tires crunching gravel echoed across the empty morning as Caleb Maddox eased his aging truck up the narrow road that wound toward the hills. In the back seat, his 8-year-old son Leo peered through the street window, eyes wide and curious, as the town of Briar Ridge faded behind them. It was a small place, tucked between golden fields and sleepy woods. The kind of town that remembered your name, even if you'd only passed through once. Caleb hadn't come to pass through. He'd come to stay, or at least try. The job was simple. Fix a barn. Nothing fancy. A week, maybe 2. Just enough to buy them some breathing room. The kind of job a man like him could do without getting too attached. He wasn't looking for roots. Not anymore. Not since Anna passed. Grief had a way of turning permanence into quicksand. Leo kicked his feet against the seat, humming a tune Caleb didn't recognize. The boy had inherited his mother's brightness, her way of pulling light into even the darkest places. And Caleb was grateful, because lately everything felt a little dim. The driveway to the Langdon place was long, lined with aging oaks whose branches arched above like a cathedral. When the house came into view, Caleb slowed. The farmhouse stood with quiet dignity, its white siding sun-faded, its porch sagging gently at the edges. A few hundred yards away, the barn leaned slightly to the right, its red paint peeling like old wallpaper. A woman stood by the barn, her arms crossed over a flannel shirt, her figure still as stone. Caleb parked and stepped out. "Caleb Maddox," she called, voice even but unreadable. "That's me," he said, extending a calloused hand. "You must be Miss Langdon." She shook his hand. Firm grip, no nonsense. "Genevieve, thank you for coming." She led him toward the barn, every step purposeful. Caleb noticed the way she scanned the structure, not just with concern but affection. Like a woman studying a beloved elder she couldn't bear to lose. "Been in my family for generations," she said, almost absently. "My father built it the year after I was born. Still has good bones," Caleb said, running a hand over the frame. "Leaning a bit, but nothing we can't fix." Genevieve gave a short nod. "That's the hope." Leo, who had been exploring quietly, popped his head into the barn. "Dad, look, a ladder to the loft. Can I go up?" Caleb glanced at Genevieve, who nodded. "Careful," Caleb called. "Watch your step." They spent the morning assessing the damage. Caleb took notes, muttering under his breath as he measured beams and traced the roofline with a practiced eye. Genevieve worked alongside him, surprising him with her knowledge and unwillingness to merely supervise from a distance. She held ladders, handed him tools, asked questions. By noon, Leo had made friends with a stray tabby cat and was sharing bits of his sandwich with it under a maple tree. Genevieve watched from the porch. "He's a good kid," she said. Caleb followed her gaze. "Yeah. Got his mother's heart." Genevieve didn't press, but her expression softened. There was something in her eyes, an echo of understanding. Loss, maybe. Loneliness. That evening, as Caleb packed his tools, Genevieve hesitated before speaking. "I make a decent pot roast," she said. "If you two don't have plans, you're welcome to stay for supper." Caleb blinked. He hadn't expected that, but Leo lit up beside him. "Can we, Dad? Please?" Caleb looked at Genevieve, who gave the smallest of nods. "We'd like that," he said. Dinner was quiet, simple, and unexpectedly warm. The house was filled with little signs of life. Books stacked haphazardly, the smell of lavender from a candle burning low. As they ate, Caleb noticed Genevieve relax by degrees. Leo chattered happily about school and the barn and the cat he'd named Muffin. Genevieve listened, smiling more than Caleb had seen all day. After dinner, as Leo helped wash dishes, Caleb stood beside Genevieve on the porch, the night air cool and still. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him, something unreadable in her gaze. "You're welcome," she said. Then, after a pause, "It's been a long time since this house had laughter in it." A silence settled between them. Not empty, but full. Caleb didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Sometimes the heart recognizes home long before the mind is willing to believe it. And in that quiet moment in Briar Ridge, two people who'd long since stopped looking for healing found the first fragile flicker of something worth staying for. The morning sun cast a golden hue over Briar Ridge as Caleb Maddox wiped the sweat from his brow. The barn's skeletal frame stood resilient under his hands, each plank a testament to his dedication. Genevieve Langdon approached, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and something deeper. "It's coming together beautifully," she remarked, her voice soft yet firm. Caleb nodded, a smile playing at his lips. "Couldn't have done it without your guidance." Their partnership had evolved from mere collaboration to a bond forged in shared labor and mutual respect. Yet, beneath the surface, unspoken emotions simmered, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Echoes of the past one evening. As the horizon blushed with the setting sun, Genevieve invited Caleb and Leo to dinner. The Langdon home, once a fortress of solitude, now resonated with laughter and warmth. Over a hearty meal, stories flowed. Caleb spoke of his late wife, the void her passing left, and his quest for a fresh start. Genevieve listened intently, her eyes misting as she shared tales of her family's legacy and the weight of expectations. Leo, ever the curious soul, chimed in. "Do you ever feel like the past holds you back?" Genevieve smiled gently. "Sometimes, but it's also a reminder of where we come from and the strength we possess. Tempests within and without days turned into weeks, and as the barn neared completion, a storm loomed on the horizon. The winds howled and rain lashed against the windows. Genevieve, determined to secure the property, ventured out into the tempest. Caleb, sensing her absence, braved the storm to find her struggling with a broken fence. Without hesitation, he rushed to her side, their combined efforts battling both nature's fury and their inner turmoil. As they secured the last plank, Genevieve slipped, but Caleb's strong arms caught her, pulling her close. For a moment, time stood still, the storm around them paling in comparison to the tempest of emotions between them. Shadows cast by new arrivals, the calm after the storm was short-lived. A stranger arrived in Briar Ridge, a man named Victor Blackwood. With polished charm and veiled intentions, he approached Genevieve with proposals that threatened the sanctity of her land. Caleb's protective instincts flared. "What does he want?" Genevieve sighed, her brow furrowed. "He claims to have known my father. Says there are unsettled matters regarding the property." Determined to shield Genevieve and Leo from potential harm, Caleb delved into Blackwood's past, uncovering a web of deceit and ulterior motives. Roots deepened by community, realizing the magnitude of the threat, Caleb proposed rallying the townsfolk. Briar Ridge had always been a close-knit community, and together they could stand against any adversary. A town meeting was called in the newly restored barn. Voices rose in unity, pledging support to Genevieve and the Langdon legacy. Plans were set in motion to transform the farm into a communal space, ensuring its preservation for generations to come. Harvesting hope as autumn painted the landscape in hues of amber and gold. The farm buzzed with activity. A harvest festival was organized, showcasing the community's resilience and solidarity. Stalls brimmed with produce, crafts, and laughter. Blackwood's attempts to disrupt were met with unwavering unity. The collective strength of Briar Ridge rendered his machinations powerless. Defeated, he departed, leaving behind a community more bonded than ever. Confessions under starlit skies. One tranquil evening, beneath a canopy of stars, Caleb and Genevieve found themselves walking along the river's edge. Caleb broke the silence. "I never thought I'd find a place where I truly belong again." Genevieve's eyes met his, vulnerability shining through. "Neither did I, but sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us home." Their hands brushed, fingers entwining, as the barriers they'd built slowly crumbled, making way for a new beginning, a tapestry woven anew with challenges overcome and hearts mended. Life in Briar Ridge flourished. The farm stood as a beacon of hope, its fields echoing with the laughter of children, the bark of a loyal dog, and the harmonious melodies of a community united. Caleb, Genevieve, and Leo, once strangers, brought together by circumstance, now stood only as family, their roots deeply entwined in the rich soil of Briar Ridge. As the seasons changed, so did they, embracing the ebb and flow of life, and finding solace in the enduring strength of love and community. The next morning dawned gentle and gold, casting long rays over the Langdon orchard, where the wind stirred softly through rows of trees, long overdue for pruning. A thin mist clung to the earth like a memory refusing to fade, and Caleb Maddox stood at the edge of the barn, staring out at the land he'd been steadily learning, though he hadn't expected it to teach him so much about himself. Inside the kitchen, a quiet hum filtered through the open window. The kettle whistled on the stove, and Genevieve Langdon moved with practiced care. For the first time in years, she wasn't cooking for one. Her hands worked the dough with a gentleness born of ritual, but her mind wandered back to the night before, the sound of Leo's laughter echoing through the old house, Caleb's quiet smile as he took in the family portraits. The way something had shifted, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. Dusty, the scrappy mutt Leo had adopted, sat faithfully at her feet, as if understanding that this morning was different, as if sensing that the rhythm of this home had changed. Caleb arrived with a knock on the screen door, Leo right behind him, hair tousled and cheeks ruddy from sleep. He held a drawing clutched in one hand, an elaborate crayon sketch of the barn mid-repair. Dusty perched proudly on top. "I brought blueprints," Leo declared, grinning. Genevieve chuckled, her heart tugged in a way she didn't entirely understand. "I'll be sure to consult the architect before the next nail goes in." Caleb stepped inside and hesitated, not because of awkwardness, but because stepping into someone's home now felt like more than just passing through. He handed Genevieve a jar of apple preserves wrapped in twine from the market in town. "Thought they'd go well with your biscuits." She took it, their fingers brushing briefly. A charge passed between them, soft but undeniable. The three of them sat at the long oak table in the kitchen, surrounded by the scent of cinnamon and coffee. And for a little while it felt like they weren't three strangers brought together by circumstance, but something more, something still, unspoken, still tender, but real. That afternoon Caleb worked in the barn, pulling down damaged beams and reinforcing the loft. Genevieve joined him with a pail of lemonade and stood watching as he moved with confident precision. "You've given this place more than just repairs," she said after a while, her voice barely louder than the wind. "You've given it back its breath." Caleb paused, brushing dust from his hands. "I think maybe it's the other way around." She tilted her head. "This place," he continued, "this land, this barn, it holds history. It reminds me that not everything broken has to be thrown away. Some things are worth the work." Genevieve blinked, her eyes shining, not with tears exactly, but the threat of them. She turned away too quickly. "There's something I need to show you." They walked through the orchard, past a rusting iron gate Caleb hadn't noticed before. Beyond it lay an overgrown path lined with stone markers, an old family cemetery. My grandfather is here, and my parents, even my older sister, Genevieve said softly. She died young. A fever. Caleb didn't say anything, just listen. I come here when I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore. They were the stewards of this land. I'm just the one trying not to mess it all up. You're not, Caleb said. Not even close. Genevieve looked up at him, startled by the certainty in his voice. You kept this going, he said, gesturing to the orchard. Even alone. That takes more strength than most people ever know. A breeze rustled through the trees, scattering blossoms like whispers. She didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. That night, Leo stood by the fireplace in the Langdon living room, a flashlight held beneath his chin. And then, he said dramatically, just when the night thought the ghost had vanished, it leapt out of the well. Genevieve gasped, pretending to be scared. No! Caleb laughed, sitting back on the sofa. The house, once so quiet it seemed to echo with emptiness, now buzzed with life. After Leo was tucked into the guest room upstairs, Dusty curled up at his feet. Genevieve lingered in the hallway. Caleb joined her, and they stood outside the door for a moment, listening to the slow, steady breath of sleep on the other side. He's a good kid, she whispered. He is, Caleb said. Caleb said. He's stronger than he knows. They turned to head downstairs, but Genevieve hesitated. Would you stay for a bit? There's tea. Caleb nodded. I'd like that. In the kitchen, with the lights dimmed and the tea steeping, Genevieve finally asked the question she'd held back for weeks. Do you ever stop missing her? Caleb looked up slowly. Your wife, Genevieve clarified, though she knew he understood. He was quiet for a long time before answering. No, he said, but the missing changes. It's not just pain anymore. It's memory, gratitude, even love in a strange way. Genevieve nodded slowly, her hands wrapped around the mug. I lost someone, too. My mother, my compass. After she was gone, I closed everything off. The house, the land, my heart. Caleb reached across the table, covering her hand with his. You didn't close it off, he said gently. You kept it safe. You kept it safe. That's different. Genevieve swallowed hard. No one had ever told her that. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, soft and rhythmic. The kind of rain that made you stay where you were just a little longer. The next day, the quiet didn't return. Instead, something new arrived. People. Word had spread through Briar Ridge about the repairs on the Langdon property, and curiosity blossomed. First came Ruth the 12 from the diner with a basket of muffins. Then Mr. Granger from the feed store stopped by with nails and extra fencing. Children from the nearby farms rode their bikes down the lane just to see the barn that was rising again. Genevieve watched it all, stunned. Caleb grinned. You were never forgotten. They just didn't know how to come back. That night, she opened a drawer in the hallway and pulled out an envelope, old yellowed, its corners soft. She handed it to Caleb. My mother's plans, she said, for a community garden. She wanted this land to feed more than just our family. Caleb read the elegant cursive, the lists of fruits and herbs, the careful diagrams. You could still do this, he said. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. Would you help me? His answer was a whisper. Always. The following weeks brought color and motion to the Langdon homestead. Caleb and Leo became fixtures, Leo building raised beds with reckless joy, Caleb hauling compost and tilling soil. Genevieve coordinated with neighbors, revived old irrigation lines, and even hosted the first volunteer potluck under the barn's new rafters. Each day brought new shoots of green and fresh patches of laughter. And with them came the slow, sure realization. This wasn't just a revival of land. It was a revival of love. One evening, as Caleb and Genevieve stood beside the orchard watching the moon rise, he reached into his back pocket and pulled something small, a carved wooden heart, smoothed by hand, etched with vines. "For you," he said quietly. "It's not fancy, just something I made." Genevieve took it carefully, her thumb tracing the vines. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I wanted you to have something that didn't just say thank you," Caleb said, "but said I see you, all of you." Genevieve felt her breath catch. "You do, don't you?" He nodded, and in the soft hush of that moment, surrounded by fields reclaiming their bloom and a boy's laughter drifting from the garden, Genevieve leaned in and kissed him, gentle, grateful, and full of promise, not for the life lost, but for the one they were building, together. Roots in the rain the morning after the storm. Briar Ridge lay shrouded in a heavy silver mist. Tree limbs hung low. Rainwater pooled in the ruts of the gravel drive, and the once proud barn stood bruised but not broken. Its roof bowed, the north fence reduced to splinters. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only follows a night of howling wind and flickering lights. A quiet that pressed into the chest, demanding breath be taken slower, deeper. Caleb Maddox stood just beyond the wreckage, boots sinking into soft, soaked earth. He ran a rough hand through his damp hair, eyes squinting up at the jagged tear in the barn's roof. Leo was safe. Dusty, too, curled up beside the fireplace like nothing had happened. And Genevieve was inside the farmhouse, drying off, warming up, and, for the first time, letting someone else take charge of the cleanup. He hadn't said much to her last night after hauling her away from that collapsing fence, but he didn't have to. The way her fingers had clutched his arm, trembling not just from cold, but from the sudden, terrifying vulnerability that said enough. She wasn't used to needing anyone, but she hadn't pulled away. The farmhouse door creaked open behind him. Genevieve stepped out, wrapped in an old flannel shawl, her hair still damp and curling at the edges. She looked different in the light, less contained, as if the storm had washed away a layer of distance she no longer needed to keep. "I made coffee," she said, her voice hoarse from the night. "It's strong." Caleb smiled slightly, turning toward her. "Good. We're gonna need it." They stood side by side in silence, steam from her mug curling between them, mingling with the mist. She tilted her head toward the broken fence. "I was foolish." He shook his head. "You were brave. Stubborn," he added, giving her a sideways glance. "But brave. I've been holding on to this land like it's the only part of my family I've got left," she admitted, voice quieter now. "Sometimes I forget it doesn't need to be held with clenched fists." Caleb bent to pick up a fallen beam, muscles flexing beneath his damp shirt. "Or maybe it does," he said. "But only if someone's helping you hold it." She didn't answer right away, but then, very softly, she said, "I'm not used to help lasting." That stopped him in his tracks. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Well, I'm not used to staying in one place," he said. "Maybe we're both doing something new." Genevieve's expression didn't change much, but something in her shoulders eased, and that was enough. They worked until noon, together and apart. Caleb on the barn's frame, Genevieve salvaging tools and boards from the shed. Leo came out mid-morning with Dusty at his heels, carrying 2 peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in foil. "We're on official barn duty," he announced, handing over the sandwiches with all the gravity of a soldier delivering rations. "Captain Leo reporting for duty," Caleb said with a grin, ruffling the boy's hair. Genevieve watched them, father and son, so intertwined, so naturally threaded into each other's silences and smiles. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen something like that, if she ever had. Later, while Caleb nailed in new support beams, Genevieve found herself watching from a few feet away. He worked with quiet precision, each movement practiced but purposeful, like someone who had found steadiness in the rhythm of fixing what was broken. "What did you do before all this?" she asked. He looked over, pausing. "Construction? Construction. Mostly small projects. After my wife passed, it was just me and Leo. I took whatever work let me keep him close." Genevieve nodded slowly. "It shows, the way he looks at you." Caleb's gaze dropped for a moment, then returned to hers. "He saved me more than I saved him." She understood more than she let on. That evening, the sky cleared to a golden hush, and the farmhouse filled once again with the scent of dinner. Genevieve's roast chicken, Leo's contribution of lumpy mashed potatoes, and the sound of dusty, sneaking scraps under the table. After the dishes were rinsed, and Leo had wandered off to draw superheroes on scrap paper, Genevieve poured 2 glasses of wine and led Caleb out to the porch. The stars above Briar Ridge blinked slowly to life, shimmering in the crisp spring air. "I used to sit out here every evening," she said, handing him a glass. "Pretend I wasn't waiting for someone to come home." Caleb didn't press. "My brother, he left after the funeral. Said he couldn't breathe here anymore. I stayed, tried to hold it all together. For my parents, for the land, for the land." She took a sip. "But somewhere along the line, I stopped living and started preserving." Caleb reached out, his hand brushing hers where it rested on the wooden arm of the chair. "You can do both," he said softly. "Preserve what matters and live again. They're not enemies." Genevieve turned her hand under his, threading her fingers through his calloused ones. The porch light flickered gently above them. Neither one let go. The next morning, a package arrived at the farmhouse gate. Genevieve opened it on the kitchen table. A letter from the county. Development inquiries. Resonating notices. A familiar chill crawled up her spine. The past, clawing its way forward. Caleb read over her shoulder. "They're testing the waters." She nodded. "It's Caldwell. I know it is. He's tried before. What do you want to do?" "I want to fight," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm scared." Caleb nodded. "Good, that means it matters." That afternoon, Genevieve did something she hadn't done in years. She walked into town. People stopped and stared, but not unkindly. At McAllister's feed store, she spoke to Tom, the aging owner who remembered her father. At the library, she left a notice asking for volunteers to help rebuild the barn. And at the town hall, she scheduled a meeting to speak against the resoning inquiry. Caleb watched her from the steps of the post office, pride swelling in his chest. She looked different in the sunlight, still composed, but with fire behind her eyes. Back at the farm, she found him waiting on the porch. "I started a fight," she said, breathless. He smiled. "Good. Now let's win it." In the days that followed, Briar Ridge showed up. Old-timers with stories about Genevieve's grandfather, teachers who remembered field trips to the farm, neighbors who offered lumber, nails, and hours of labor. Caleb orchestrated it all, turning the farm into something it hadn't been in years. A gathering place, a rallying cry. And in the quiet moments, after the last nail had been driven, after Leo had gone to bed, Caleb and Genevieve found themselves on the porch again, the silence between them no longer empty, but full of meaning. One evening, as the moon climbed high, Caleb turned to her. "I don't know where this ends," he said, "but I know I don't want to walk away from it." Genevieve looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, then dawned. When spring finally unfurled itself fully over Briar Ridge, the barn stood proud again. The fence held strong, and in the garden near the porch, wildflowers Leo had planted with dusty blue and yellow. One morning, Genevieve found Leo sitting under the old oak with his sketch pad, Dusty sprawled at his feet. He looked up and grinned. "I'm drawing the farm," he said. "I want to remember it forever." Genevieve knelt beside him, tears threatening. "So do I." Later, as the sun dipped low, she stood with Caleb beneath the porch awning, the scent of wood smoke and blooming flowers curling around them. "Caleb," she said quietly. "Yeah," she turned to him. "Stay, he didn't need time to think." "I already am." The old ash tree behind the Langdon house had been there for over a century. Its gnarled branches stretched wide like an embrace, shading a small bench beneath it, where Genevieve's mother used to sit and knit in the evenings. The tree had weathered storms, droughts, and time, just like the house, just like Genevieve. But this morning, as she stood beneath its limbs with Caleb by her side, the weight of Harlan's threats pressed down heavier than the clouds above. "They always come when they think you're alone," Caleb murmured, staring out across the dew-laced fields. Genevieve nodded, her hands clasped tightly before her. Dominic knew exactly where to press. "My father's debts, the zoning board, the clause in the will I didn't even realize existed." Caleb turned toward her, his brow furrowed. "We'll fight it. You don't have to give in." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "It's not about giving in. It's about watching everything your family built get turned into something you don't recognize. It's about watching it slip away and wondering if maybe it would hurt less if you let it go yourself." Caleb didn't speak right away. He understood. God, he understood. After Laura died, I'd sold their house without telling anyone. Couldn't bear the hallway that smelled like her hair, the bedroom where the light hit her side of the bed differently. But this wasn't about memory. It was about legacy, about roots, and Leo had already begun to grow his here. "We won't let it slip away," he said finally. "Not without a fight." Genevieve gave him a small, tired smile, then turned back toward the house. "Then I guess we'd better start planning." That evening the Langdon kitchen buzzed with energy it hadn't seen in years. Caleb sat at the table with a notepad. Leo curled up on the floor beside Dusty, drawing superheroes with pencils dulled from overuse. Genevieve paced near the stove, coffee in hand, her shoulders tense but her mind clear. "We need to find out what Harlan's holding over the zoning board," she said. "He's too confident. There has to be something more than my father's debt." Caleb tapped his pencil against the table. "I know a guy, Jack Vickers. Works down at County Records. He owes me a favor. I'll talk to him tomorrow." "And the land," Genevieve continued, eyes fixed on the papers in front of her. "If I can prove it's historically significant." "Which it is," Caleb cut in. "Which it is," Caleb cut in. "Then they'll need to go through a lot more hoops before they can touch it." Leo looked up. "Can I help too?" Genevieve knelt beside him, brushing a lock of hair from his eyes. "You already are, sweetheart. Just by being here." Leo grinned and held up his drawing. "I made this for you. It's you and Dad and me. And Dusty's wearing a cape." Genevieve blinked, tears threatening to rise. She took the drawing with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. The next week passed in a blur of phone calls, dusty archives, and meetings with townspeople who remembered her father not as the tycoon Harlan painted him to be, but as a man who once donated lumber for the town's library roof and taught Sunday school when his knees still worked. And then came the morning when the past walked straight through Genevieve's front door. "You're Langdon's girl," the woman said, voice scratchy with age, but strong. Genevieve turned from the sink to see a figure framed in the doorway, lean, sun-weathered, wrapped in a quilted coat that looked older than the barn. "Mrs. Elsie Trammell," Genevieve said in surprise. "You worked with my grandmother." "That I did." Elsie stepped forward. Heard Harlan sniffing around your land. Genevieve nodded. He's pressing hard. Claims my father owed too much, that he has rights to seize it. Your father was proud, but he wasn't stupid. What father was proud, but he wasn't stupid. He may have made mistakes, but he wouldn't leave you with nothing. She dug into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. He gave this to me the month before he passed. Told me to hold on to it. Said one day you'd need it. Genevieve took the envelope, her fingers trembling. Inside was a letter and a key. They opened the cellar that night. The old one behind the shed, hidden beneath the rusted storm doors, Caleb had once assumed were just storage for tools no one used anymore. It wasn't tools. It was ledgers, contract. A ledger marked Langdon Harland Holdings, with notes in her father's handwriting detailing every payment, every disagreement, every clause that Harland had failed to disclose. At the bottom, a page marked Nullified, May 2009. May 2000. Your father ended the partnership, Caleb said, reading it again. Legally. Signed and filed. Harlan doesn't own a damn thing. Genevieve stared at the page, her voice barely above a whisper. He counted on me never finding this. On me being too afraid to look. Caleb turned to her. Now we know. Now we fight. They delivered the documents to the county board 2 days later. Jack Vickers, true to his word, had pulled every file tied to the Langdon land. With the new evidence and a few signatures from long-time residents supporting the farm's historical importance, the tide began to shift. And with that shift came something neither Genevieve nor Caleb expected. The town rallied. People began showing up, one by one. Some brought casseroles, others tools. A few simply came to say they believed in her, in the farm, in what she and Caleb were trying to build. Leo ran through the fields with Dusty dragging kids from town into games of tag and hide and seek. The barn, once a broken shell, stood tall and strong now, its repairs finished, its bones steady. And under the ash tree Genevieve found herself smiling more than she had in years. The night before the county board was set to vote, Harlan showed up again. He stood at the gate, polished shoes sinking slightly in the dirt. "You think you've won," he said. Genevieve met him head-on, Caleb at her side. "I don't think," she said. "I know." Harlan's jaw clenched. "This is a delay. You won't hold it forever." "Maybe not," Caleb said. "But we're sure as hell going to try." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "You've made a mistake aligning yourself with them. This land, this legacy, it's built on loss." Genevieve's voice was calm but resolute. "Yes, and now it's built on something else. Hope." Harlan turned without another word, his shadow long and thin beneath the ash tree. They never saw him again. The board's decision came on a warm Thursday morning. Caleb, Genevieve, Leo, and half the town packed into the old town hall. When the chairperson read the verdict, that the Langdon property would remain under its rightful ownership, and that any attempts to challenge that would be considered legally resolved, the room erupted in applause. Leo hugged Genevieve so tightly she had to crouch to catch her breath. "I knew you could do it," he said into her shoulder. Caleb reached for her hand, and for the first time, Genevieve let him hold it in front of everyone. Weeks passed, then months. The barn hosted its first community potluck. A new garden was planted behind the house, its vegetables tended by eager hands, both young and old. And beneath the ash tree, a bench was rebuilt, 2 planks longer, wide enough for 3 people and 1 dusty dog. One evening, as fireflies blinked across the fields and laughter floated from the porch, Genevieve leaned against Caleb, her voice soft. "I never thought this would be my life." Caleb kissed her temple. "What did you think it would be?" "Quiet, tired, done. He turned to her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "And now?" She looked at Leo chasing Dusty in the tall grass. At the barn, golden in the setting sun. At the garden, at the house. At peace, the wild flower patch had begun to stir. Just a few shy green shoots, barely taller than a child's fingertip, but to Genevieve Langdon they were a promise whispered from the earth, delicate and defiant, the same way she felt when Caleb Maddox looked at her like she was more than a landowner with too many burdens and not enough answers. It had been 3 days since they planted the seeds, 3 days since the soil, Leo's laughter, and Caleb's warm, calloused hand brushing against hers reminded her that life didn't always need to be perfect to be beautiful. But peace never lingered long in Briar Ridge. That morning Genevieve was up before the sun. She stood by the kitchen window, clutching a mug of black coffee that had long since gone cold, her eyes fixed on the fields. Dew clung to the tall grass. A gentle fog blanketed the valley below. And somewhere in the barn she could hear Caleb humming, low and rough, like gravel under boots. He always started early. Not for the money, she suspected, but because it gave him a reason to stay. Behind her, footsteps padded across the hardwood floor. Leo. He was barefoot, clutching a folded blanket and rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is Dusty out there with Mr. Caleb?" Genevieve smiled softly. "He never lets Caleb out of his sight, does he?" Leo grinned, toothy and proud. "He's part of the crew now." She tousled the boy's hair, careful not to press too hard. Caleb had told her about Leo's asthma, about the long nights in emergency rooms and the fear that came in waves. She carried that knowledge like a fragile heirloom, delicately with reverence. "I made cinnamon toast," she said. "Extra cinnamon." "Don't tell your dad." Leo's face lit up. Dealed by mid-morning, Genevieve stepped into the barn with a fresh glass of lemonade. Caleb was knee-deep in repairs, tightening joints on a stubborn beam near the loft. "You missed breakfast," she called, setting the glass down. "I miss a lot of things," he said, his smile flashing briefly before fading back into focus. She tilted her head, studying him. "Like what?" He didn't answer right away. Wiped his brow, turned a wrench, then finally, moments, small ones. Like hearing Leo laugh without worry. Like quiet mornings that don't feel heavy. Genevieve didn't move. "That sounds like grief talking." Caleb looked at her, and hope. There it was, that fragile, complicated thing between them again. A thread they were both too scared to pull in case it unraveled. Before she could speak, footsteps approached. Heavy, deliberate. It was Sheriff Colton Briggs, broad-shouldered, weathered, and rarely one to stop by unless something was wrong. "Morning," he greeted, but his voice held weight. Genevieve set down her gloves. "Colton?" He tipped his hat. "Just came from town. Thought you'd want to know." Dominic Harland filed a petition with the county board. He's pushing hard for development approval. Claims the Langdon land is neglected and underutilized. Caleb stepped forward. "That's not true." Briggs nodded, but his face remained grave. "Doesn't matter if it's true. He's got money, and he's convincing people." Genevieve felt her stomach drop. "How long do we have? Board hearing's been expedited. 10 days?" That night, the quiet around the farmhouse was too loud. Genevieve sat on the porch, wrapped in her father's old flannel jacket, trying not to let the weight of the day crack her resolve. Caleb joined her, his hands still smelling faintly of cedar and sawdust. "I won't let him take this place," she said, a voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Caleb replied. "But you shouldn't have to fight him alone." "I've fought alone most of my life." He turned to her. "And how's that worked out for you?" That earned a half-smile, barely there. He leaned back in the chair beside her, hands clasped behind his head. "We've got 10 days. That's enough to make noise." She shook her head. Dominic plays chess. I'm holding checkers. Caleb chuckled. Then we changed the game. The next morning they began. Not with lawyers or press conferences, but with people. Caleb drove Leo into town, visiting every local business, every neighbor who owed a favor or had a reason to remember the Langdon name with something close to affection. He carried with him a petition, a simple message. The Langdon farm matters. Genevieve stayed back, writing letters. She penned one to the Historical Society, detailing the decades of heritage tied to the land. Another to a local conservation group, requesting an emergency assessment of the surrounding wetlands, a move that might slow development plans. The community surprised them. People began to show up, some bringing baskets of food, others offering labor. An elderly couple brought old photos of barn dances that once took place on the Langdon property. A young woman offered to paint a mural on the barn wall. Wildflowers and wheat rising defiantly toward the sky. I used to dance here, she told Genevieve. Met my husband under those rafters. Genevieve nodded, eyes stinging. We're trying to save it, the woman smiled. Then I'm in. 3 days before the hearing, Caleb found Genevieve in the garden, staring down at the shoots they'd planted with Leo. They're growing, she whispered. So are we, he replied. She looked up at him, unguarded. I'm scared. He didn't offer her empty reassurance. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, he stepped close and said, You don't have to be alone anymore. The night before the hearing, a storm rolled in. Not the kind with wind and rain, but with dread and silence and memories too heavy to carry. Genevieve couldn't sleep. She wandered into the barn just past midnight and found Caleb there, sanding a beam smooth with slow, methodical strokes. My wife, her accident. It wasn't just sudden. It was avoidable. She was driving to pick me up. I was drunk. Genevieve swallowed hard. Caleb. He shook his head. I've been sober since. For Leo. But for years I thought I didn't deserve a second chance. Then I saw him laughing here, with Dusty, with you. She stepped forward. You do deserve it. He looked up. So do you. And for the first time, he reached for her hand. She let him. The county hearing was held in a stark government building 2 towns over, the kind of place that smelled like ink and dust and cynicism. Genevieve stood at the front, palms clammy, but voice steady. She spoke of history, of soil and sacrifice, of generations who'd built something sacred with their bare hands. Then others spoke, the mural artist, the elderly couple, the grocer who now stalked produce from her land. Finally, Leo stood, prompted by no one, and said, Please, don't take it away. We just planted flowers. There was no vote that day, no declaration of victory. But as they walked out of the building, Dominic Harlan's smug composure had cracked, and Genevieve knew something had shifted. A week later, an official letter arrived. Petition denied. Langdon Farm recognized as cultural and environmental asset. Development plans suspended indefinitely. Genevieve didn't cry. She just walked outside, knelt beside the wildflower patch and whispered, Thank you. That evening, as the sky blushed pink and gold over Briar Ridge, Genevieve and Caleb stood on the porch, watching Leo and Dusty chase fireflies across the yard. I've never seen him this free, Caleb said. Genevieve took a deep breath. Maybe it's time we stop running from what we've lost. He turned to her. And start building what's next. She nodded. He reached for her hand again. This time, she didn't hesitate. The flowers bloomed 2 days later, bright, wild, unruly, just like the life I'd begun to grow, against the odds, and exactly where it belonged. The sunrise over Briar Ridge had a quiet kind of majesty, like the land was holding its breath after a long prayer finally answered. Caleb Maddox stood near the edge of the old pasture, coffee steaming in one hand, Dusty curled at his boots. In the distance, the Langdon barn, once sagging and forgotten, stood tall and painted, its red boards catching the morning light like a beacon. Behind him, laughter echoed. Leo was chasing another boy around the base of the oak tree that had watched generations pass. A week ago, that tree stood alone. Today, it shaded the start of something bigger than just a farm. Genevieve's voice floated from the porch. You'd think it was a county fair with the way they're carrying on. Caleb turned, smiling. She stood barefoot on the steps, hair pulled back in a loose braid, her mug cradled between weathered hands. Something about her looked different these days, less haunted, more rooted, as though the earth itself had claimed her back from grief's relentless grip. They've earned it, Caleb said, nodding toward the small crowd setting up a long table by the garden. So have you, she chuckled softly. Not sure I did much. You opened your gates, he said simply. The rest followed. Genevieve looked away, blinking against a swell of emotion. The transformation had been gradual. It began with a few phone calls, a whispered invitation to the town's memory. Then came the paint, the hammers, the old men who once rode these fields, showing up with tools and stories, like they'd been waiting for permission to come home. Then came the women with casseroles and marigold seeds, the teenagers with speakers and rakes. The mayor even dropped by, not for photos, but to roll up his sleeves and dig up weeds. And somehow, amidst all the rebuilding, Genevieve had started to let go of the silence she'd worn like armor. The dinner tonight was Caleb's idea, a gathering to thank everyone and quietly remind them what they were fighting for. The threat from Dominic Harland hadn't vanished, but something had shifted. The land was no longer just hers. It was theirs. And that mattered. Still nervous? Caleb asked, his voice gentle. Genevieve nodded. It's been a long time since I've had a house full of people. He stepped closer, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. You're not the only one starting over, she smiled, and for a moment they simply stood in the quiet, the kind that didn't ask for words. By sunset, the Langdon farm pulsed with life. Lanterns swayed from the porch beams. Children darted between hay bales. Music spilled from a battered radio someone had dusted off from the barn's storage loft. Long tables groaned under the weight of dishes. Fried chicken, peach cobbler, cornbread still warm. Laughter carried across the fields, soft and bright like fireflies. Genevieve moved through the gathering like someone learning how to dance again. Hesitant steps, careful grace. She paused when she spotted Helen Booker near the rose bushes. The two women hadn't spoken since Genevieve's father's funeral, but Helen didn't hesitate. She crossed the space, arms open. It's good to see you, General. Genevieve didn't realize how much she needed that hug until she was in it. Meanwhile, Leo had become the unofficial tour guide for the younger kids. He dragged them through the garden beds, told them stories about Dusty catching squirrels, embellished, and pointed proudly to the newly sprouting wildflowers. We planted those together, he said, puffing his chest. They're going to be everywhere next spring, near the barn. Caleb was pouring sweet tea and swapping stories with Joe Hammond and 3 other farmers who'd known Genevieve's grandfather. He wasn't trying to take the lead. He just did. The way someone steps forward when they're not trying to impress, just trying to help. It was what had drawn Genevieve in from the start. Can't remember the last time this place felt like this, Joe said, shaking his head. Maybe it never did, Caleb replied. Maybe we're building something new, Joe grinned. Well, if you're sticking around, son, we might actually have a chance. Caleb chuckled, but the words lingered. He wasn't sure when exactly it had happened, when this town became more than just a stop. Maybe it was the morning Leo asked if they could stay forever. Maybe it was the night Genevieve fell asleep on the porch beside him, their shoulders touching, the silence easy. He looked toward the house. She was on the porch now, smiling at a group of teenagers balancing lemonade glasses. He felt it then, not just attraction, but a tether, the kind of pull that wasn't just about the heart. It was about place, about purpose. And then, like a shadow returning, Dominic Harland appeared at the end of the driveway. His car, sleek and out of place, gleamed beneath the fading light. He stepped out slowly, buttoning his suit coat like he was arriving at a business gala instead of a country gathering. Conversations faltered. A few people stopped what they were doing. Genevieve's smile faded. Caleb was already moving toward her. Harland offered a thin-lipped smile. "Quite the spectacle, Genevieve. Thought you didn't like attention." She stepped down from the porch, shoulders squared. "What do you want?" "To remind you of reality," he said smoothly. "No matter how many pies you serve or songs you play, the numbers don't lie. You owe what you owe." Caleb reached her side. "She doesn't owe you her home." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "And you are someone who isn't impressed by your cufflinks," Caleb replied, his voice calm but firm. "You want to push this, take it to court. But know this, Briar Ridge stands with her now. You won't just be fighting one woman anymore." Harlan's smile twitched, something cold behind his eyes. "Let's see how long sentimentality lasts when the bills start stacking up again." He turned and walked away without another word. Dust rose behind his car as he disappeared into the dusk. Genevieve let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Caleb gently placed a hand on her back. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I will be." Behind them the music resumed, a little softer, a little more defiant. Joe Hammond raised his glass to standing ground. A cheer went up. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the last lantern flickered out, Caleb and Genevieve sat on the porch steps, shoulder to shoulder. Leo was asleep inside, curled against Dusty, exhausted from joy. "You won't give up?" she said quietly. "No," Caleb agreed, "but neither will we." Genevieve looked at him, really looked. "Why are you here, Caleb? I mean, really?" He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Because I got tired of running. Because I wanted Leo to know what it's like to belong somewhere. And because I saw something in you. Strength, yes. But also someone who doesn't know she's allowed to lean on anyone." Her throat tightened. "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't," he said, "but it's real." She leaned her head on his shoulder. For a long time they sat in silence. Then she whispered, "I'm scared." He rested his cheek on her hair. He rested his cheek on her hair. "So am I." They sat beneath the stars, two people piecing together what was broken. Not just fences and barns, but hearts, families, dreams. Somewhere in the garden, a wildflower bud unfurled under the moonlight. Quiet, small, but alive. Just like hope. The Langdon farm was still quiet the morning after the market, but it was a different kind of quiet. One filled with the soft afterglow of something long dormant, now awakened. Genevieve stood barefoot on the dewy grass, her mug of coffee cradled in both hands. The remnants of tents and wooden stalls lay scattered across the field, canvas fluttering gently in the breeze like sails on a calm sea. It had taken a full season and a lifetime of courage, but the land had spoken yesterday, and people had listened. From behind her, the screen door creaked. "You're up early," Caleb said, voice rough with sleep as he stepped onto the porch, shirt half-buttoned and hair tousled from a restless night. "I couldn't sleep," Genevieve murmured. "Too much to remember." He joined her, slipping an arm around her waist without hesitation now. The ease between them had grown like the wild flowers behind the barn, slow, rooted in shared labor and heartache, nourished by belief. Genevieve leaned into his side. Do you think it's really over? That Harland won't come back? Caleb was quiet for a moment, his thumb brushing over the fabric of her worn sweater. I don't know if men like him ever stop trying, but I do know this. He underestimated you, and he damn sure underestimated this town. She smiled faintly at that. I did too, she whispered. I thought I'd been forgotten. Caleb tilted his head, his eyes steady. No one forgets the woman who plants seeds that last generations. They just need reminding. Down by the fence, Leo was already chasing Dusty through the grass, both boy and dog bounding as if the world had never been broken. Look, Leo shouted. The bees are back, and they were tiny specks of gold and black flitting between the blossoms Genevieve had planted with trembling hands just weeks ago. Wildflowers had sprouted in earnest, stubborn and bright, refusing to be anything less than beautiful. That afternoon, as the sun arced overhead, Genevieve walked the length of the farm alone. Every fence post she touched had a story. Every crack in the porch floorboard, every stone in the garden, carried echoes of her father's voice, her mother's laugh, her own childhood footsteps. By the oak tree near the south pasture, she paused. It was the last place she'd seen her father. Stern, proud, and already slipping away into the illness that would take him far before she was ready. I hope you saw it, Papa, she murmured. I hope you saw what they did. What we did. A breeze stirred the branches above. She liked to think it was his answer. Inside the barn that evening, Caleb and Genevieve sorted through crates left over from the market, some handmade soap from young Clara Bishop, a stack of honey jars from the McKellen brothers, and a handwritten thank you card tucked beneath a bag of lavender tea. You know, Caleb said, placing the items on a newly rebuilt shelf. This place isn't just a farm anymore. It's a memory in motion. It's alive. Genevieve looked around. The barn, once teetering on collapse, now stood sturdy and strong. You made it alive again. No, he said, walking toward her. I spent so long just trying to survive. I forgot what it meant to dream. Caleb took her hands in his, calloused fingers against soft palms. Then let's dream something together. And in the soft golden light that spilled through the barn doors, it didn't feel foolish to believe they could. 2 days later, the storm returned, not from the sky, but from a manila envelope dropped on the porch. Genevieve opened it with shaking fingers. Caleb stood behind her, steadying her shoulder. Inside, a letter from Harlan's legal team. An injunction, a claim that the land had been misused, that the crowd on market day had violated zoning regulations. A new route of attack. He's still coming, she whispered, fury and fear rising in equal parts. Caleb took the papers, scanning them with quiet focus. This is desperation, he said. He's losing ground and trying to claw it back. But if he wins, then we rally again. She looked up, her voice trembling. I don't know if I have another fight in me. You don't have to, he said. We do. All of us. And that night, while Leo and Dusty slept on the couch in a heap of blankets and boyhood dreams, Genevieve sat beside Caleb at the kitchen table, going over documents by lantern light. He read. She took notes. Together, they made a plan. Not to run, but to stand. The next week brought the town back, not in celebration this time, but in solidarity. They came with clipboards and petitions, with personal stories of the Langdon Farm's role in their lives, with photos, testimonials, and letters of support. Even the mayor showed up, weary from Harlan's lobbying, but stirred by the tide of people flooding into his office. "It's not just her farm," Mrs. Carmichael had said, tears in her eyes. "It's our home." The zoning claim fell apart within days. Harlan's silence afterward was louder than any threat he could have spoken. One evening, after the final legal paper had been shredded and burned in the fire pit out back, Caleb brought Genevieve to the pasture behind the barn. He held a small box in one hand. "I know it's early," he said, "and I know we've both been through things that can't be fixed overnight, but I'm not offering a fix. I'm offering time, a hand to hold, someone to fight beside you when it gets hard again." Genevieve blinked, tears forming before she could stop them. Caleb opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring. "Will you build this life with me?" She laughed and cried and said yes, all in the same breath. And under the Briar Ridge stars, surrounded by the land they had fought for and the people who had chosen them, they sealed not just a future, but a promise to keep showing up, to keep believing, to keep planting, even when the world said nothing would grow, because now they knew it would, eventually. The shape of home. The morning after their quiet conversation beneath the stars, Genevieve Langdon woke to the scent of coffee and laughter drifting in from the kitchen. For a moment she thought it was memory playing tricks, a dream stitched from longing. But as she stepped into the hallway, bare feet brushing against cool wooden planks, the laughter became real. Caleb stood over the stove, wearing a borrowed apron with faded sunflowers, flipping pancakes with theatrical flair. Leo, still in his pajamas, was perched on a stool, grinning as he offered unsolicited instructions. "More cinnamon," the boy declared. "And don't burn it this time, Dad." Genevieve leaned quietly against the doorway, the sight rooting her in place. This wasn't just noise or company. This was life. "Morning," Caleb said when he noticed her. His voice held that gravelly softness she'd grown to recognize, worn insincere. "We're trying to perfect the Maddox pancake." She smiled, brushing a loose curl from her cheek. "From the smell of it, I'd say you're close," Leo beamed. "Miss Genevieve, you need to be the judge." It was the first time he'd called her that without hesitation, like she belonged. She stepped forward and accepted the plate Caleb offered, still warm, the pancake dotted with blueberries and a dash of powdered sugar. She took a bite. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, honest. And in that moment it tasted like everything she never knew she'd missed. Over the following days, the rhythm of the Langdon farm shifted. No longer just a haven for wildflowers and whispered ghosts, it had become a place of intent. The second weekly farmers' market was being planned. A string of volunteers came daily, Mrs. Heller with her scones, old Joe Bennett offering extra hands and stories about her father, and teenagers from the high school helping repaint the faded barn walls. But even amidst the bustle, something quieter was taking shape. Each evening after chores were done, Caleb would linger a little longer, sometimes helping her stack firewood, sometimes sitting with her on the back porch as Leo chased Dusty through the yard. Words weren't always necessary. There was comfort in the shared silence, a kind of understanding that no longer needed to be translated. And Genevieve, once so careful to keep people out, found herself letting them in. She baked with Leo, laughing at his wild guesses about how long to whisk eggs. She read to him in the evenings when Caleb stayed late. She even took to planting small herbs by the windowsill, something she hadn't done since her mother passed. Hope, she realized, often grew in the quietest corners. One particularly crisp morning, Caleb arrived at the farmhouse later than usual. His truck pulled in slower than it typically did, the engine quieter. When he stepped out, Genevieve noticed the shift immediately. He looked tired, more than just from work. "Everything okay?" she asked gently, walking toward him. He hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Just got off the phone with my late wife's parents. They want to visit. It's complicated. Genevieve didn't pry. Instead, she led him to the porch and handed him a mug of coffee. He sat, staring out at the horizon. They blame me in ways they don't say out loud. And maybe they should. I couldn't save her. I was driving. The confession landed between them, raw and vulnerable. Genevieve set her mug down carefully. You loved her. That much is obvious. And love doesn't come with guarantees, only with weight. Caleb turned to her, eyes rimmed with fatigue. What if Leo hears things I can't undo? What if they try to pull him away? Now Genevieve's chest ached, not just for him, but for Leo, for the fragile little family that had rooted itself into the soil of her world. They won't, she said firmly, because Leo isn't just surviving here. He's growing. He's safe. He's home. Caleb swallowed hard. And you're part of that now, whether you're meant to be or not. She looked away briefly, wind catching her hair. I meant to be. And that, more than anything, held the weight of promise. The visit came 2 days later. Evelyn and Richard Maddox were everything Genevieve had imagined. Polished, restrained, and carrying grief like a pressed flower between the pages of a book. Preserved, delicate, but ever-present. They were polite, even gracious, but the way they looked at Caleb held something sharp. Leo, to his credit, greeted them with his usual enthusiasm. But Genevieve could feel the tension like static in the air. Over dinner, Evelyn commented on the old Langdon family photos lining the wall. So much legacy here, she said, tone neutral. It's hard to know what to do with it sometimes, isn't it? Genevieve met her gaze, unflinching. It depends on what part of the legacy you want to carry forward. Later, when the visitors had left and silence fell again, Caleb turned to her on the porch. They asked if I'd consider moving back east. For Leo, Genevieve's stomach twisted. What did you say? He exhaled. I said no. And that I wasn't doing it alone anymore. She blinked slowly. You mean that? I do, he said, reaching for her hand. You're not just this place, Genevieve. You're part of us now. She held on to that long after the stars came out. Weeks passed. The farm blossomed into something bigger than it had ever been. The markets continued. The town invested, and the wildflowers Leo planted with Genevieve began to bloom. Tiny bursts of color in the field behind the barn. On a cool spring evening, Genevieve stood barefoot in that field, watching the wind play through the petals. Caleb walked toward her, holding a small weathered box. She turned, curious. What's that? He opened it, revealing a ring. Not gold, not flashy. Just silver, shaped like a winding vine. Simple, strong. I don't have anything fancy to offer, he said, voice trembling slightly. No big house, no savings. Just me and Leo. And this life we're building, one fence post at a time. Genevieve's breath hitched. I'm not asking for perfect, he added. I'm asking for this, for mornings with bad pancakes and wildflower fields, for porch lights that don't turn off too soon, for believing in what we can't always see yet. Tears stung her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, to all of it. That night, as Dusty curled at Leo's feet and the kitchen glowed with quiet light, Genevieve Langdon and Caleb Maddox sat at the table. Not as a broken woman and a grieving man, but as something whole, something born from storms and silence, from buried seeds and unspoken hopes. Outside, the wind stirred the flowers they'd planted. Inside, love finally had a name, and it sounded like home. When the wildflowers bloomed, the breeze carried the scent of earth and lilacs as Genevieve Langdon knelt beside the flower beds at the edge of the old orchard. It had become her morning ritual, checking on the patches of wildflowers that now danced across the land. Some mornings she came alone, lost in thought. Others, Leo accompanied her, peppering her with questions about soil and petals, sunlight and root systems, while Dusty chased bees with the enthusiasm of a pup who hadn't yet learned the consequences. But this morning it was quiet. Just the soft hum of bees, the song of a far-off wren, and the creak of the old screen door swinging open behind her. "You're up early," Caleb said, his voice still gravelly from sleep. He wore a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves and carried 2 mugs of coffee, one for her and one for himself. Genevieve smiled as she accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "Couldn't sleep." The wind kept tapping the shutters like it had something urgent to say. "Probably just wants in for breakfast," he said, smirking as he sat beside her on the grass. They sipped in companionable silence, watching the blossoms sway like old dancers reliving memories in the sun. It had been nearly a year since the first wildflowers had gone into the ground, one trembling hope at a time. Now the once barren field was alive. The soil had remembered how to hold something tender. So had she. "You know," she murmured, still watching the flowers, "I used to think beauty like this was only temporary. A brief bloom, then back to gray." Caleb set his mug down. "And now?" Genevieve glanced at him, the corners of her eyes wrinkling with something like wonder. "Now I think maybe it was just waiting for the right season." He didn't speak. He just reached over, took her hand, and held it like something precious he didn't want to rush. That afternoon, Leo dragged an old chalkboard from the barn and propped it on the porch. "Langdon Learning Center," he declared, underlining the words in bold yellow chalk. "Miss Genevieve teaches plants. Dad teaches hammer stuff. And I teach Dusty how not to eat socks." Genevieve laughed, a sound that still startled her in its clarity. "That's quite the curriculum." Leo grinned. "We're going to be famous." And in a way they already were. The Langdon farm had become something of a legend in Briar Ridge, the place where things grew again, where a town found its roots in one another, where a woman who'd once walked the land like a ghost had started laughing again. By evening, families arrived with mason jars full of fireflies and old quilts to spread across the lawn. The monthly market had morphed into something more, part gathering, part reunion, part reminder of all that could still be beautiful. Caleb stood beside the barn, arms crossed, watching as Genevieve... Caleb stood aside, arms crossed. He caught glimpses of her smile, her laugh, the way her hair caught the light like something the sun had waited all day to touch. He didn't know how he'd gotten here, from heartbreak and scraping by to this quiet miracle of being seen, needed, wanted. But he knew he wasn't going back. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the stars began their quiet parade across the sky, Caleb found Genevieve in the kitchen, rinsing berries in the sink. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning against the doorframe. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes amused. "That always sounds like trouble." He smiled, stepping closer. "I want to build something." "You already did," she said softly, setting the bowl aside. "This house? This land? This life?" "No," he interrupted gently. "Not just that. I mean something for you. For us." Genevieve blinked, caught off guard by the sudden weight of his words. Caleb hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and wooden. He opened his palm to reveal a ring, carved from the oak beam that had once supported the barn, now sanded smooth, oiled with care, etched with a delicate pattern of vines. "I don't have much," he said, voice raw. But I have my hands, my heart, and I have a boy who adores you. Genevieve stared at the ring, then up at him, tears gathering silently in her eyes. You don't have to answer now, Caleb added quickly, or ever. But I wanted you to know, whatever we build next, I want to build it with you. She didn't answer with words. Inside, two souls held tight. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life deepened. Leo had taken to wearing a straw hat and carrying a clipboard. Langdon Farm foreman, he'd proclaimed, inspecting tomatoes and chasing squirrels with equal fervor. Dusty remained his loyal shadow, more bark than bite, and just as full of joy. Genevieve's gardening classes expanded. Neighbors offered to host workshops. School teachers brought students on field trips. The land pulsed with energy, memory, and new dreams. But change, as always, arrived uninvited. One morning, a letter arrived addressed to Genevieve. Handwritten, no return address. She read it alone on the porch, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. What is it? Caleb asked, approaching with caution. Genevieve handed him the letter. It was from her estranged sister, Clara, whom she hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. I heard about the farm, the letter read. I heard about you. If there's anything left between us, I'd like to see you. I'm in town. I'll come tomorrow if you'll let me. Genevieve stared out at the horizon. I don't know if I can face her. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Do you want to? I don't know, she whispered. That part of my life, it broke something, and I've only just started to feel whole. He reached for her hand. Then maybe it's time to see what healing looks like now. When Clara arrived the next morning, it wasn't with drama, but with hesitation. She stepped from her car slowly, hands clasped in front of her, eyes searching for something familiar in a landscape changed by time and toil. Genevieve met her halfway, tension in every step. Clara's voice broke the silence. You look just like her. Genevieve flinched, but then softened. And you still talk too much. A pause, and then quiet laughter about the choices that had split them apart, the legacy that had weighed too heavily on all their shoulders. By evening, the two sisters sat under the orchard tree, their fingers brushing the grass, their hearts worn but no longer closed. That night, as the sun dipped low, Caleb found Genevieve alone by the flower bed. She's staying for a few days, she said quietly. We have a lot to talk about. He nodded. You okay? Genevieve smiled, faint but real. I think I will be. Then, after a pause, she reached for his hand. And yes, she added, her voice barely above a whisper, I want to build something with you. With both of you. He turned to her, eyes full, hand firm. And the wildflowers at their feet swayed gently, carrying their promise into the dusk. There's something quietly powerful about the story of Caleb, Genevieve, and the wildflowers that keeps blooming in my mind. Something deeply reflective of the seasons we all go through. I may not be restoring a barn in Briar Ridge or carving a ring out of an old oak beam, but I know what it's like to carry loss in one hand and hope in the other, unsure which to set down first. In my own life, I've had chapters marked by silence, by grief that doesn't announce itself but settles in like dust in the corners. I've known the weight of starting over, not just in the physical sense like a new home or job, but in the emotional reshaping that comes when life asks more of you than you thought you had to give. Like Genevieve, I've been guarded, hesitant to let anyone into the fragile spaces where my past still lingers. And like Caleb, I've had moments of wondering if the pain I carried was too much for someone else to walk alongside. But what their story taught me, what it reaffirmed, is that healing doesn't always come with fanfare or clarity. Sometimes it comes in the form of small, steady acts. The rebuilding of an old structure, the planting of something with no guarantee it'll bloom, the simple decision to stay when everything in you once ran. I think about how Caleb carved a ring not from gold or diamonds, but from wood that had weathered storms, because that's what love looks like after loss. In my life, I'm learning to appreciate those quiet, imperfect gestures. I'm learning that sometimes love is not loud. It's showing up. It's standing beside someone when their past knocks at the door. It's not fixing the pain, but sharing its weight. Just as the farm transformed when people came together, painting, planting, remembering, I've come to understand the value of community, of allowing others to bear witness to your life, especially the parts that feel unfinished. It's easy to believe we must carry everything alone. Harder, but truer, to realize that we were never meant to. And as the story suggests, sometimes we don't need the whole path to be clear. We just need to believe in what hasn't bloomed yet. Whether it's a career dream paused by self-doubt, a relationship waiting for forgiveness, or a part of myself that I've long neglected, this story reminds me to dig into the soil anyway, to trust that the right things grow in time. And maybe, just maybe, the parts of us that feel broken are the very ones with roots strong enough to hold everything together when the next storm inevitably comes. Like Caleb and Genevieve, I'm learning to stay, to rebuild, to believe. To believe, to believe, to believe. And in that, a new kind of life quietly begins to bloom. Before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from the heartland of America, a quiet countryside, or maybe a bustling city, dreaming of open fields? Drop a comment below. I read every single one, and if this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of warmth in your day, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another uplifting story like this. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.